So, I thought we should talk about Railway Empire, since Railway Empire 2 comes out, as the time of this recording, tomorrow. So, it just seemed like a good idea to discuss it, and the game is pretty much just, a spiritual successor to Railroad Tycoon. Okay, good talk. Okay, I guess I have to talk about it properly. So Railway Empire is not quite as dramatic as the name would imply. It pretty much is, like I said, a spiritual successor to Railroad Tycoon. It's a very, very similar kind of game. You are the owner of a railway, a Railroad Tycoon, but they couldn't call it Railroad Tycoon, so they called it Railway Empire. You put your track down, you connect the cities, you run your trains. It, at its core, is the same basic kind of game, just like the Railroad Tycoon series. So I guess you're wondering, what is there really to talk about if it's so similar? Well, there are some key differences, some quality of life improvements, some more modern takes on the whole idea of running a railroad. For one thing, visually the game is obviously a lot better, as it is a modern game. It has more polygons. It's really that simple. Technology has improved over the years, so naturally things look a lot nicer in it. That being said, the music is alright, but I gotta concede, I'm not crazy about the soundtrack in Railway Empire. It's fine, like, it's totally serviceable, but I felt like Railroad Tycoon 2, 3, and even Sid Meier's Railroads had really, really classic, old school feeling blues style soundtracks. Empire just doesn't have the same feel to me, and it's not that it's bad, it just doesn't feel like it's quite as nice a vibe, I guess is what I'm trying to say, but it's still fine, and hey, worst case scenario in a game like this, you can always turn on Spotify in the background and play whatever you want, so hey, no big deal. The game has a ton of different modes. There's scenarios, there's a campaign, things like that. Whether or not you want to be focused on certain goals that the game gives you, or just want to play the game in free mode and do whatever you want, there's always something here for you. Just like Railroad Tycoon, the game offers sandbox mode and things like that, just in case you feel like just building, you don't want any kind of restrictions. In terms of constructing the lines, there are a lot more options in terms of how you can do things, and I gotta be honest, I feel like Empire does a much better job than Railroad Tycoon when it comes to logically running a railroad. And what I mean by that is you could put multiple trains on the same line with relative ease. Now, you could do that in Railroad Tycoon as well, but there was really an efficiency limit when it came to how best you could do that, generally speaking. For the most part, it was running a single train back and forth unless it was a double track, in which case you ran two. But in this game, the idea is thrown forward of utilizing signals, and the signals are a lot deeper than you'd think. There are just start-stop signals, and those are very useful, but there are also signals that make it so that certain lines will only be used for one-way traffic. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, it basically forces the trains to only go a certain direction down that single line. And the trains that are coming back down the line are always going to go down the opposite track that's signaled to go the other direction. This basically guarantees the trains would always pass by each other, and even if there's a scheduling conflict, as long as you place the appropriate stop signals, they will wait for the other train to be out of the way before proceeding. The game is coded in a very good way with this, to the point that it is possible to have up to a dozen trains going down almost the same line without any kind of interference, as long as your station is large enough to accommodate them, and as long as there's enough trackage and signals to deal with it. This is very reminiscent of how actual modern railways tend to be set up. If you'll notice, in a real railway, if you've actually ever been train spotting or whatever, more than one train goes down the same main line on a daily basis. That is totally normal. And railways are set up to be able to allow that without the trains running into each other, so long as things are running normally, which, you know, obviously accidents happen, but the point is that this sort of thing is something that is done in the real world, and Empire actually allows you to do it, where you can actually have multiple trains going down similar tracks, and they're not getting hung up because, oh, there's a train on the line, like, 18,000 miles in the other direction, I can't go forward. No, yeah, you totally can, because you put signals there. The signals allow the trains to move forward safely. And this is a very, very, very nice feature that really enhances how the game is played. And there's a big focus in Empire on multiplayer, I would argue. I've never played it with anybody else, but in terms of the computer AIs, they are all over pretty much every mode that, well, is a mode where you want them to be there. And the AIs are actually a colorful cast of characters. You get to choose one of them whenever you set up your railway, and each one has different strengths and weaknesses regarding how they manage their own railroads. Now, I like the idea of having competitors because, again, it's a more realistic outlook on being a railway tycoon. The Railroad Tycoon games, actually, generally did have this function, but it wasn't like the main focus, where in Empire it seems like that was a big push. And having other competitors is definitely something that's interesting, especially when the stock market comes into play. You can actually buy out and merge with other railways to enhance your own. But the AIs also drive me crazy for two reasons. One, I don't really care for the art style. It's not bad, it just doesn't really jive with me. It just looks too cartoony, which is weird because the actual models for the locomotives, for example, are actually pretty realistic. The characters, though, aren't. And they're all out of their minds in their own unique ways. And they never, ever, ever shut up. And this drives me up the wall. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It could be the most innocent of things, like connecting a city. And one of them will be like, oh, are you sure you wanted to do that? Oh my god, I'm not really sure. Actually, I think he shouldn't have done that. That was a dumb idea. And they'll always cry whenever you win an auction because, oh no, I bid. You're not allowed to bid anymore because I did it because, yeah, I get it. You're so much more important than I am. Shut up. And they constantly, incessantly send spies and corporate espionage to harass you. And what I love about this is they will actually tell you they're doing it. It's like yes, I am confessing to a federal crime. I just wanted you to know that I had done it. Like, who does that? Who actually commits an act of corporate espionage and goes to their competitor and is like, yeah, I did it. I'm sure you won't press charges, though, because it's not illegal or anything. Oh, wait, yeah, it is. They are brutally irritating at times. I just want them to be silent. It's comedic at first, but after a while, I'm just like, shut up before I buy you. And then I do. Not because it's always a good idea. I usually do it just to silence them. Because otherwise they will keep jabbering on. Your railway could literally be nationwide and they have a small short line off in the corner somewhere and they will still somehow think they're better than you. And I'm just like, you guys are the worst. Would you stop it for 2 seconds and just run your line? If you spent less time yammering and more time running a railway, maybe you'd actually get somewhere, but no, I'm destroying you. And I wish there was more of a focus on historical context because these characters really have none. There are other more realistic characters in some of the scenarios. They dropped the cartoony comedic stuff for a while and actually have scenarios based off of actual historical railway building. And it's in these scenarios that things really start to shine with the game. Things are actually fairly enjoyable, but my god is the game actually difficult. I'm not gonna lie, this is probably one of the harder sims out there. Empire takes no prisoners in many cases. It will destroy you if you're not careful. And it doesn't even seem to be a proper easy mode. There's medium and hard, as well as very hard in some, but no easy. There's no easy allowed here. So if you actually want to win the scenarios, you really have to be genuinely good at what you're trying to accomplish. If you're into that, then yeah, that's great. But if you want something to just chill, the scenarios may be a bit out of your reach in that regard, which is kind of obnoxious if you ask me. The Railroad Tycoon series did have its share of challenges, but it balanced it out with a lot of really easy stuff, and I'll give Empire this: the campaign itself is pretty bare bones and rather simplistic. So if you just want to go through the basic campaign, it's not that difficult, but anything beyond that is going to push you. Again, if that's what you want, it's great. But if you really aren't, it might drive you a bit up the wall. I also feel like the locomotive pool is not great. There's a pretty nice tech tree, I think. I like the actual tech tree and the way you upgrade your stuff. There's actually a significant amount of customization there where you research different kinds of technologies that improve your lines. But the actual locomotive market is a little scant, in my opinion. There really aren't that many different kinds. I don't know if they added more than DLC, but what I will say is that, okay, look, I love steam locomotives. I make no fabrication around that. I absolutely adore them, and they're my favorite type. But they are not the only piece of railway history. There are other types of locomotives that could be in the game. Electric comes to mind, because there are 0 of those, and there is precisely one kind of diesel, the E-Series, which is adorable because that's an entire series. There were actually a ton of different specific E units. They could have called it E1, and that would have made more sense, but no, it's just E-Series. But whatever, okay, I get it. But one diesel? No electrics? Really? At all? That means electrifying your lines is not a feature at all, because there's no reason to do it. You can never use electric locomotives at any point. And the diesel, well, I mean, yeah, it exists. What I think is hysterical about this is that the way you manage your lines involves building maintenance shops, which makes sense, as well as putting water towers. The water towers will be stopped at automatically whenever your locomotive needs more water, and that makes sense for everything that isn't the diesel. The diesel stops too. Their coding is pretty much identical, and that's just funny, because the whole point of diesels was that they were more efficient than steam locomotives and didn't need, say, water. And all of a sudden, the diesel has to stop at a water tower, when in reality, when a railroad dieselized, the first thing to go was the water towers, because they didn't need them anymore. But this game doesn't allow for that because, well, the diesel was just kind of thrown in as a little bonus at the end of the Steam Age. And the game doesn't go any further than that. It's just that one diesel and nothing else in the future. No electrics, which definitely existed alongside steam locomotives, and I guess plenty of steam locomotives, but not as many as I'd like. So in terms of longevity and building different types of lines with different types of locomotives to experiment and throw them around, there really isn't much there, because for one thing, many locomotives are just outright better than others, which isn't unusual, but also there just aren't that many in general. Once you maximize your locomotive pool for an era, there's really no going further. In the early 1900s, for example, once you get the diesel, you really don't have to make any changes to your lines at all. There's nothing more to manage. And sometimes these games do wind up like that, and yeah, I guess you could, in theory, put more steam locomotives if you wanted to, but that would literally render your lines less efficient as the game is coded. The only exception I would think is the Texas, because the other thing they do is they specify which locomotives are good for express trains, passenger and mail, and which locomotives are good for freight. Some locomotives are also good for mixed traffic. The game has an automatic function that applies certain cars to certain trains, and that's good, but if you're using a locomotive that's only good for one or the other, you have to specify which one it's designed to pull. When you get to diesels, the only one that sticks around is the Texas, because the diesels are only good for express. I mean, you can put them on freight trains, but why would you? Because they're not as good at that. The Texas is much better. And this is why they needed at least one more diesel to have a freight diesel, or make the E-Series mixed traffic. Lord knows the E-Series could pull freight trains too if they had to. And that actually bothers me a little bit, because I get that some of the locomotives were specified as being for passenger service, like the Hudsons, but I promise you, the Hudsons could definitely pull freight trains really well. So it doesn't even make sense in that regard. Maybe I'm being too nitpicky here, and I admit that I'm probably thinking too much about it, but I just wish there was a bit more here, because beyond the nice features involving line placement, I feel like the game isn't all that deep, at least in terms of the locomotive pool, which I feel like is kind of the major point of these games in many cases. I mean, what kind of rail fan doesn't like seeing the locomotives? That's like the whole thing. When there aren't that many of those, or at least many different kinds, it makes me question, how long I want to be playing the game. And that's always been my issue with Railway Empire. Going back to it, I just start getting bored really quickly. I can still sit down and play Railroad Tycoon 2 for hours and be fine, and that game was made in the late 90s. But Railway Empire doesn't have the same longevity for me because there just isn't that much more to it. Yeah, it does have DLC that does add more locomotives, that's true, but that's DLC. And, you know, I don't like the game that much. I'm just saying. I know that's a normal thing to add more content with DLC packs and things like that. I'm not complaining about that, because Lord knows the argument's been done to death and it's whatever at this point. But I just can't bring myself to spend money on it when I know that the base game is what it is. I don't think it's a bad game by any stretch of the imagination. It is a worthy successor to Railroad Tycoon. If it was called Railroad Tycoon 5, I would have the same complaints. And I'm not sneering at all at the developers, and I'm glad they made a sequel. I look forward to Railway Empire 2, and I really genuinely hope that there's a bunch more content there, and they've worked out some more modern mechanics. In comparison, something like Transport Fever 2, which is one of my favorite games ever, I'll tell you, Transport Fever 1 is totally not even worth playing anymore. I'm being real with you. I can't stand Transport Fever 1 because I played 2 first. And 2 is leaps and bounds superior to the first game. It makes the first game look like a beta. So I'm hoping with Railway Empire 2, it'll be the same deal, where Railway Empire 1 was fine, but just didn't have the staying power. Maybe Railway Empire 2 will actually be something that's genuinely phenomenal, and I'll be able to 100% recommend people play it. If you like the look of Railway Empire 1, I don't think it's a bad game by any stretch of the imagination. It's worth giving a try, and I've talked to plenty of people who do genuinely like it. I just didn't have the same experience personally, but I'm still getting 2, so I must have liked it enough to get the sequel. Till next time. This is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.